Assalamu alaikum. Peace be on you, my dear friends. I recorded a video earlier on about that continues the discussion on Surah An-Nisa, which is the fourth chapter of the Qur'an. And previously I did a part one of that chapter 4 and dealt with the topic of that video. The title was sex, marriage and money, something to that effect. And I did a follow-up video, the part 2, and what happened is in the previous video I took it up to I think verse 28 of that chapter, and then there's a remaining or a balance of 4 verses further on in that chapter, and I just did a synopsis of those verses, which I will present to you now shortly. But before I go there, let me also deal with another question that I want to throw into this discussion also, and that is the question of love and courtship in Islam, and specifically from the perspective of the Quran. Now, let me just quickly mention to you my understanding from the Quran as far as love, courtship and marriage are concerned. Now, in my reading of the Quran, what I see is that there is a clear differentiation between the actual act, the contract of marriage, in other words, the commitment to marrying, the contract of marriage, and the actual execution or the implementation of the contract, or the consummation of the marriage. That is my reading from the Quran, is that and what tells me that there is a time difference between the signing of the contract and the time of consummation. In other words, conjugal rights, basically assuming conjugal rights and sleeping basically with your partner and being intimate with a partner, right? In other words, having sex with your partner. So I do see a gap between the signing of the contract and the actual consummation of the marriage. Now that opens it up to some sort of deduction or reasoning, and what I deduce from that is that the actual process of meeting a spouse, a potential partner, consists of 2 steps. The first step is to get to know the person and to become acquainted with the person and to have friendship with a person, and then the culmination of that process of courtship is consummation. What does that tell me? I'm going to make it very simple. What I see here is that the act of agreeing to marrying somebody is something that can be done very early on. So basically, if you know somebody and after a month or 2 of conversing and discussing and finding out about this person, you basically could enact or agree to a marriage. In other words, so there would be the aqd nikah, which is the offer and the acceptance of marriage, and that is pretty much what we today see as the engagement. It is basically to ask the person, will you take me in marriage? And the person will say, yes, I accept you. I will accept you in marriage. Simple. The sira, the offer and the acceptance. And that basically is an in-principle agreement to the marriage. Now, from my reading of the Quran, there's also a gap between that and the time when everyone is actually ready, when the husband or the groom is in a position to finance their lives and in a position to pay any form of dowry that might be required. And until that time, they are not to consummate the marriage, but they are within their rights to be friendly, to even be in each other's company. And it would be legitimate to be in each other's company. And I would, I see that as the process, the way the process should unfold. Now, yes, the Quran does speak about what if a divorce should take place before the consummation. What if a divorce should take place during that period? And the Quran actually does address that. That's why I say I am left with the impression that there is a delay between the actual nikah and the consummation. So the Quran does in fact answer that. And the Quran says that they could remit partially or in full. And it is more, it is encouraged that they should remit part of the dowry if they had received it by that time. Obviously, in most cases, the way I'm presenting it here, the dowry might not have been paid, full support might not be possible. The young man could be studying, or the young woman could be studying, and they might be working their way towards moving in and setting up a home on their own where they would cohabit and become a regular husband and wife. So that is really how I see it, and that is how I would maybe, I think, would be a recommended way of proceeding. And it is an approach, I think, that is already in use in some Muslim countries. I do believe there are some Muslim countries. I'm not sure about Egypt. If there's a viewer from Egypt, you can enlighten me, that they are already using this methodology. And so I just want to leave you with that, that is a practical way for young people to meet, to get to know each other, and to have this period of courtship that is within the framework of the Quran. So I just wanted to leave that thought with you, and then what we'll do is we'll proceed to the recording I made about the remaining verses. Very, very powerful few verses. These few verses that I will be covering deal with trouble in the marriage, and it actually offers a way forward when there is trouble in the marriage, and I hope you'll enjoy that presentation. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inu. My good friends, it's good to be back with you, and I'm going to continue with chapter 4, which is the chapter that deals with the issues pertaining to women. And in the previous episode, I showed you that there are quite a few contentious verses that have been abused by those who are the detractors of the divine message and the divine code. Those are the ones that read the text not as it should be read, but in order to dissuade or to mislead. And our reading of the text is, of course, a reading that respects the intention of the text, and that is to bring harmony, to bring justice, to bring fairness amongst people. And so any law can be abused or can be used to improve the conditions of people. And those people who read the law or the code as written in the holy text of the Quran in a way that is destructive, they are the evildoers. And what we do here is we read the text in a way that brings harmony and the best of outcomes to human society. And so let me continue with the reading of this text. Remember last time we were reading this chapter, and this chapter basically deals with the women and how the men are supposed to be the guarantors of the well-being of women. And that is plain and simple what this text says. And so let us quickly just go through it again, and then we will proceed with the rest of the verses that deal with the topic of women and the defenseless. Now this verse here, it states, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Now this verse has been misinterpreted often. قوامون means they are the standers. Literally the word قوامون means they stand up. They are the ones. Qama means to stand. Qawwama means to make stand. So men must guarantee that women, that they have their rights. And this is not an unthinkable scenario, you see, because men physically being stronger, having no encumbrances, the encumbrance of having children or taking care of little children, bearing children, men, by virtue of having the additional freedom of movement, the lack of encumbrances of children physically and physiologically, are seen, and having the additional strength as hunters, are seen as being physically in a position to guarantee the physical well-being and the social well-being of women. Ar-rijal qawwamuna ala nisa. They are the guarantors of the well-being politically, socially, economically of women. There's no other way of reading this verse. If you try and read it any other way, you are not doing justice to the text. It says, Ar-rijal qawwamuna ala nisa. They are the people that must guarantee political, economic, social enfranchisement of women. That women have their rights and have their place in society. بِمَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بَعْدَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْدٍ. For that Allah has guaranteed the one some sort of advantage over the other. And the advantage I've mentioned, it is the physical advantage in physiological strength and capacity. It is the advantage of not having to bear children or to rear children in their infancy. It is the emotional advantage where men are more detached emotionally, and women just are created with an additional level of that motherly or concern and compassion. And so men have that advantage. They are colder, they are more indifferent, and that is the advantage. وَبِمَا أَنفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. Right. Now let's quickly make sense of that. The thing is that with this advantage, they are responsible for economically empowering women. Because of this advantage, the burden of empowering women financially through various mechanisms, and I've mentioned these mechanisms to you last time. One of the mechanisms is the dowry, the bridal dowry. It's a mechanism. It is being frowned upon by those who want to come with their wise critique of the Qur'an, and they tell you that women are treated like cattle. You are buying cattle by paying a dowry. No, those same people have no problem and no qualms with women being sexually exploited in the economy. In most of the Western world, women are being commodified and sexually exploited. So those same people who defend or who call for who claim that the Quran is putting a price on the wife like cattle, those are the same people that have absolutely no qualms with women being commodified in their societies. And that's absolute nonsense, which we reject. So what this verse is saying is that men are the guarantors of the well-being of women economically, and they should be the financial empowering, the means of empowering women. Right. So then the verse continues to say, in return. So therefore the righteous women in return are those women who diligently safeguard in private that which God wants safeguarded. So there's a contract, there's an agreement between men and women expressed in this verse, and that is that men will guarantee the women's independence financially, socially, and in return the women will be in guard or will protect the interests of the men, whether it is their children, whether it is the home that they have constructed or established, whether it is the career. All of these, she will act in defense and in support of these things. And we know that women are partners in the constructing and in the establishment of the home. And so in that partnership, women have to play the role of carefully maintaining and preserving what they have jointly developed. Then the verse goes on, وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ. But if you fear, or if you experience subversion of the home, subversion of what you've jointly established, subversion of the children, subversion of the principles and values which you have both committed to. If you fear subversion of all of that, you should admonish them, then forsake them in bed, and then you should verbally slam them. And by verbally slam them, it means the most extreme forms of reprimanding. Right? No beating, no physical beating. Doesn't fit in with the whole Qur'an. There's no beating anywhere else. You're not. There's no. The Qur'an doesn't even call on you to beat an animal. There's a verse that speaks about Solomon, the great King Solomon, and how not even the ants were done unjust violence to by the great King Solomon. And so how can this book promote kindness to the ants through the army of Solomon, the great army of Solomon? How could this book call for this ugly form of beating? And if you use the word daraba, or beating, in the sense of hitting someone, it is an extreme. You cannot use that word to mean anything but bashing or beating that person down. And there's no way that it fits in with any of the spirit of the holy text. There is no other verse that corroborates it, that supports the meaning of bashing and beating and hitting a wife. No verse does that. And this is Surah Nisa. We're going to see more verses now that will underline and confirm what I'm telling you now here. But let's move on. Let's look at this verse a bit further on. What we learn from this verse is that the men have the responsibility, women have the responsibility as the maintainers and preservers of what they have jointly established, and that there is a responsibility on the man try to rectify any situation by extreme means. And by extreme means, it means separating in bed, by admonishing them, in other words, by words of warning, and lastly, by condemning them verbally. Not beating. But should they relent and revert back to you, then cease all measures. So restore the original position, which is one of kindness. And cease all measures. Indeed, Allah is great and above all. So let's quickly move on to the next verse. I hope you can see the meaning of this verse. There's no meaning of beating. There's no meaning of women receiving a lesser station in this life. The situation is physiologically and physically, men are given some sort of superiority, physically in strength. And for that, they are appointed as the economic and the social empowering force of women. They are supposed to guarantee the empowerment of women in society. And in return, women are supposed to be the safeguarders or the guardians of that which the men have established in the home. Now, let me just say a final word here. You know what? This book does speak in generalities, but the book does not really necessarily address the exception to the general rule. And maybe I should mention it here, that this verse, it characterizes the two types of roles, right? And these are the typical roles of men and women. But even though they are the typical roles of men and women, it does not necessarily mean that these roles are not to be interchanged. So we know that women can be in a position of greater empowerment financially, economically, to men. And of course, the roles may be reversed. I know a lot of people, a lot of couples today, where the women are more empowered than the men, and where the men have to guarantee the home and the well-being of the home. And so the Quran, although it mentions the typical roles, we should not then deduce that that there are never ever exceptions to those roles, and that those roles could not, in some cases, be reversed. So keep that in mind with this verse. You know, the book is a book that pertains or relates to our reality. And wherever you live, I am sure that you have seen a home where the woman is the provider, the financial provider, and where the male partner is the homemaker, the stay-at-home dad. And I think we just need to read the verse then and interpret the roles in a slightly adapted way when it comes to those homes. Right. Of course, the verse will actually make more sense, because which woman can beat a man? And so the verse then would read that if a woman feels she is abandoned by a man, and that he has betrayed or infringed on those things that they've jointly accomplished, and he's subverting the marriage, then she may refuse to share his bed, and she may, in fact, slam him verbally or condemn him verbally, right? So the same would go vice versa. Let's quickly move to the next verse then. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا فَابْعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا إِنْ يُرِيدَا إِصْلَاحًا يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا خَبِيرًا. Should you face a breakup between a couple, then appoint an arbiter from his family and one from her family. Should the couple desire resolution, Allah will resolve it between them, for Allah possesses all knowledge and information. There's the verse, and it's a beautiful verse that prescribes or that offers a deadlock breaking mechanism. And the deadlock breaking mechanism is, of course, mutual arbitership, not from him alone, but from both sides, which could be a father, could be an uncle, could be a brother, could be any member of her family or her close friends, and anyone from his side. And that these two then work to see how they can restore the relationship. Okay. وَيَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ. They ask you what the policy should be. Now this is now the Prophet is reciting or rendering his wahi that he received from Jibreel. And the reading goes as follows. They are asking you what the policy is with respect to women. Tell them, Allah has already given you the policy regarding them. It constitutes those verses recited to you from the code, speaking about the defenseless, fatherless women, whom you should pay everything due to, and whom you, as free and independent people, should preferably marry, as well as the young men of humble means. The policy of women includes that you should maintain absolute fair play regarding the defenseless and fatherless. Whatever good you do, you should realize that Allah knows about it. Now, this is as faithful a meaning as I could create, and it is fully understandable and comprehensible to me, and I hope to you also from this verse. It's a beautiful verse. وَيَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِيهِنَّ وَمَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ فِي يَتَامَى النِّسَاءِ اللَّاتِي لَا تُؤْتُونَهُنَّ مَا كُتِبَ لَهُنَّ وَتَرْغَبُونَ أَن تَنْكِحُوهُنَّ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ من الولدان وأن تقوموا لليتامى بالقسط وَمَا تَفْعَلُونَ مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِهِ عَلِيمًا. Again, let me summarize the verse to you. You've heard the meaning and you've heard the Arabic now. Those of you who can understand the Arabic, you will be able to compare and see that I've been faithful to the Arabic and I've tried to draw out the meaning that makes sense. So what the verse is doing, it summarizes obviously verses 1 to 20 or 27, the earlier verses that I've read to you in our previous episode, in part 1 of this episode, of this discussion of the women. And what came out in that first bunch of verses in chapter 4 was the idea that women, those who are defenseless, those who fall in the ranks of the orphans, we use the word orphan, but really the Quran speaks about defenseless, fatherless women, women who have lost their husbands, their fathers, who are young, who are underage, all these women and girls and young men who are with these women, this is really seen as one group. So the Quran doesn't see women's empowerment as a matter all on its own. You see, I'm going to stand still and tell you that in my experience, the weakened position of women is a phenomenon in society with deep roots. It goes back all the way to the disempowerment of that woman as a young woman, as a girl, child. And it also happens with the poverty, with the environment of those women. If a woman grows up and is subjected to an environment where the men are poor and unable to flourish economically, then those women will remain in a position of economic weakness. And so what the Quran does, it deals with the problem of the disempowerment of women, or the weakened state of women, in a holistic sense. It looks at those women, but it also looks at their brothers and at their sons. You see, now this is a very, very powerful position that the Quran advances here, is that the empowerment of women really happens through the empowerment of some of the men around them. That is one way of women achieving a position of strength in society, is when the men are strong and when their sons are strong in terms of financial means, then women become strong. Because a woman's strength, and I don't know about your society, but you know, a strong mother is normally gains her strength economically, financially, through strong sons. And I know from my family that with the grace of the Almighty, my mother died an extremely powerful woman. And when the good Lord Almighty took her from this world at the ripe age of 95, Allah yarhamha, then she was an extremely financially and socially powerful woman and an accomplished woman. But that strength and that power, a great contributing factor to that was the fact that she had sons and daughters, and most importantly, a husband. He had sons who were financially and economically stable. And so what the Quran sees is that the emancipation of women, it is completely intertwined with the emancipation and the economic growth and strength of her children, and of her surroundings, of her immediate family. So that is why this verse makes a lot of sense here. Look at this. Tell them Allah has given. So they wondered, what is the story with women, right? Especially these women who are disempowered, because this verse doesn't really address women who are already emancipated, already powerful, already successful in business around her. Those are not really the women that this verse is addressing. It's addressing those women that lack that type of security and accomplished position in society. right? So they were asking the Prophet, what about these women? And the Prophet says he's instructed to answer that those things that you were told already about the division of the estate, about marriage of women, about the dowry, those are the things that really will be the forces or the mechanisms by which women are empowered. So, and the verse just recalls those items. So it is about marrying. The verse just reminds you that the means of empowerment of women is that you should desire, you should prefer, you should go for them, you should give preference to those women in marriage. Because by marrying them, you are spreading the wealth, you're sharing the wealth. Antankihunna wal mustad'afina minal wildan. And wal mustad'afina minal wildan. You should give preference to them in marriage, and you should give preference to the poor and humble young boys or young men who are amongst in their ranks. So in other words, what the Qur'an is saying is that, okay, so let's say you have a woman who has two brothers that are also poor and miserable, or then offer your wealthy daughters to them in marriage. Right? Do you understand what the Qur'an is saying is that go and your women, your established women who are wealthy, who are maybe single, who are not married, business women, successful women, let those women marry those young chaps, and that is how you achieve generally the empowerment of women. Because when as I said, that when you empower her brothers or her sons, you are empowering her, in fact. And then it continues, the policy on women includes that you should maintain absolute fair play regarding the defenseless and the fatherless. So you should absolutely prohibit and outlaw any form of exploitation of the women. Who's about it? Let's move to the next of these 4 verses. Okay, this verse deals with problems in the marriage, right? Should a woman experience subversion or dereliction of duty from her spouse, then it is okay if they both agree on a remedy. Healing the relationship is always preferable, though. People are often torn apart by excessive demands. Okay, let's just stand still there. Should a woman experience subversion or dereliction of duty from her spouse? Now listen, the other word says, وَإِنْ إِمْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا. So it doesn't say that if subversion or dereliction is inflicted on a woman. It doesn't say that. Right? It says, إِنْ إِمْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ. If she fears, or in her mind she's experiencing subversion or dereliction. So it is if she perceives it. Right. So the word experience there would actually could equally be replaced by the word perceives. Should a woman perceive subversion or dereliction of duty, right? But I've used the word experience. But the Arabic word is khafat, if she fears. Right? If she fears subversion or dereliction of duty. Right. So now we have a situation where a woman feels abandoned, or her rights are not respected. Then it is okay if they both agree on a remedy. So what the Quran then says is that فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَن تُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا. Not the one, but if they both come to some sort of agreement. It's okay if they both agree on a remedy. Right? So the remedy, we will see now in the next verse, could be various things. But the Quran does give preference to the remedy of reconciliation. Healing, second line, the last word there, healing the relationship is always preferable though. And then a very, very powerful word here. People are often torn apart by excessive demands. How I've got Islam Awakened, which is there's 30 or 20 translations here. So let's take a look at how these other translators have translated that very verse that I've just referred to now, this one. Subversion, verse 4, chapter 4, verse 28. What they say is Muhammad Asad is, and if a woman has reason to fear ill treatment from her husband, or that he might turn away from her, it shall not be wrong for the two to set peacefully to rights between themselves. Sentence. And selfishness is ever present in human souls. Right. Selfishness is ever present in human souls. Mustafa Khattab, the humans are ever inclined to selfishness. We see another, like the pigthal. But greed hath been made present in the minds of men. Men's souls, Yusuf Ali, men's souls are swayed by greed. Right. Maududi, man's soul is always prone to selfishness. Rashad Khalifa, selfishness is a human trait, and if you do good, right, selfishness is a human trait. Right, so I've looked at all of those, and what I've done is I look at my own experience of marriage and of counseling couples and of listening to the issues between people. And what I find is a very, very apt and appropriate translation there is that people are often torn apart by excessive demands. That shuhha that is there, that excessive craving and demands, it causes the estrangement between couples. People are often torn apart by excessive demands. As from my experience with counseling other couples, it is when either party or both parties become really excessive in what they demand from the other, is that is when problems really arise in the marriage. And if we can somehow temper or somehow restrain those demands, then we will give the marriage a better chance. So, but then that is beautifully stated in the next verse. وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَاتَّقُوا. So if you can do better and practice restraint, taqwa is to contain yourself, to restrain yourself, to discipline yourself, not to let yourself run wild, excessive, without constraint, without control. If you can control, if you can restrain, if you can be more measured, if you can be more disciplined, you will succeed. So if you can do better and practice restraint, do remember that Allah is fully aware of all your doings. The reminder there is that just remember that we believe in a God that is aware of us, that is in witness, that bears witness to whatever we engage in, our actions, our sacrifices, our schemings, our mischief, whatever we are involved in and engaged in is fully known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is what we are told in the book. Very powerful verse here. When there's trouble in the marriage, when a woman senses that the guy's messing her around, it's okay if they both go and seek an agreement, a settlement. The one where they both change a bit, amend their conduct, change the way they deal with the other is preferable. Where they lessen their demands on each other. That is the preferable route for solving the problem. Right? Where they restrain themselves a bit more, where they just allow more, make more allowance. That is the preferred option. Right, let's look at the next verse. This is an aside, so this verse is an aside, and it speaks to the men. It speaks to the men particularly, and it tells the men it is impossible to be perfectly fair when it comes to women, even with absolute dedication. You see, to be perfectly just and fair and honest and decent and kind and respectful and everything, when it comes to being perfect, it is impossible. You are unable to meet the standard. The Qur'an tells us that it is impossible to be perfectly fair when it comes to women, even with absolute 100% dedication. But even so, if you are going to get complaints, if you are going to get charges of being unfair, of being wrong, of not doing this, not doing that, and that is, we as men, we know we get that. And remember, I said earlier in this talk that the roles could be reversed, right? We could reverse the roles. But even so, refrain from willy-nilly just leaving one wife for another. Don't kick this marriage up for any flimsy reason. You want to move on and take more wives or take another wife. Do not go there and leave the former abandoned and insecure. The word is like dangling. Like something, what is the image of something dangling? It is something that has no support. It is hanging out to dry, as we say in English, just saying. Don't leave your wife out to dry. Don't let her hang out to dry. If you've now just experienced one too many complaint or an issue in a marriage, you just want to quickly now dissolve the marriage and move along and take the next wife. It is not recommended. Refrain from willy-nilly just leaving one wife for another. Leaving the former abandoned and insecure. Should you choose to mend things and restrain yourselves, وَإِن تُصْلِحُوا وَتَتَّقُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. So if you choose to mend things and to maybe just control and hold in and just mend or mend a bit your ways and change some of the things that you've been doing. Restrain yourselves more. Be aware that Allah too pardons and shows kindness. So the word that what we are reminded here of is that although we think we are powerful and we have the power to inflict and to enforce our will and to change things willy-nilly, and to be unforgiving and to be so rigid and robust and harsh in our rulings and in the discipline that we maintain. Be aware that even God, who has all power, who has the monopoly of power in the universe, still shows pardon and shows kindness. Keep that in mind. You imagine yourself so powerful that even God pardons and even God shows unnecessary kindness that is not really deserved often, but He shows that kindness. So you also show that kindness. Remember, I said this is roles. We can reverse the roles. If the female partner fits the glove better, fits the description better, we interpret the verse in the form of being the female with more power in the relationship. Then, I think this is the last verse. وَإِن تَفَرَّقَا يُغْنِ اللَّهُ كُلًّا مِنْ سَعَتِهِ. Should the two of them ever choose to part, so if this agreement they make, after he's abandoned and destroyed the relationship and he's acted completely like a douchebag, and if they should decide to dissolve the marriage, then Allah will provide each according to His means. What it means there is that the means that Allah has provided, in other words, the dowry will kick in. because that is the means that Allah has provided. That is the sa'ah that Allah has indicated. So if they should decide to split up, then she will be provided from the sa'ah, from the maskavi, which Allah has put at her disposal. Allah possesses an all-encompassing wisdom. And that links now the maskavi, the division of the inheritance, the divorce, all together, and ends in the Surah An-Nisa, the code of conduct with respect to women. Just to summarize quickly again, Surah An-Nisa covers the issues pertaining to women, especially those who are disempowered, those who are weak economically and socially. The chapter really deals with those women. It offers the code of conduct with regard to those women, the policy regarding those women. If you read it in the way it should be read, it speaks about the emancipation of those women who are weak and disempowered. It speaks about the emancipation in the context of their lives with their sons, with their brothers, with their fathers. And it sees the emancipation of women not as something that requires an intervention on women, but it is an intervention to society. And then the book also speaks about infringements, if there are infringements of the code by men and infringements of the code on the side of women. So if a woman infringes on the code by dereliction of duty, then the remedy is given. The infringement on the side of men, if they should infringe on the code, then it is to seek a change in behavior, in conduct. But if all else fails, it is to opt for an amicable separation between the two.